Hello and welcome here. My name is Delilah for those of you who are new. I am starting to lose my voice, so please forgive me. We're going to get through this anyway. This week I brought you into my kitchen each night as I was cooking dinner. So I'm sharing 4 recipes with you this week. We have been in a very busy season, and so the meals I've been making recently have been very simplified. I like to make as much as I can from scratch, so in order to do that in busy weeks, I need to simplify my meals quite a bit. This was one of the first weeks in a long time where I actually had a little bit more time on my hands, so I'm slowly starting to get back into some more regular cooking, more of the cooking that I really enjoy. So there's going to be some scratch made sourdough things. There's going to be different meats and various recipes, some of them more simple, some of them a little bit more complex. This first one is probably the most time consuming. Today we are making butter chicken. So I started by making the marinade by combining a variety of different spices and ginger and garlic into some homemade yogurt, and then chopping up my chicken breast to marinate in that for at least a few hours. This is a recipe I found on Pinterest, so I'm going to leave it linked below. I do not remember all of the spices that I used, but this one turned out really, really, really good and is one I will be adding to my meal rotation. I never used to use disposable gloves for meat, but I have found that as a mom, it always seems that my kids need me as soon as I start working with meat and I can't just quickly run to them. So this has been a huge hack for me recently. If I need to, I can take them off and attend to whoever needs help. Moving on to the naan bread, I'm making a sourdough discard naan bread. Again, this is a recipe I found online, so I'm going to leave it linked below. But whenever I'm making breads or baked goods, I like to do fresh milled flour. I haven't been doing the whole amount fresh milled. I've been doing half fresh milled and then half organic all-purpose flour. I find that this keeps it light and fluffy, the texture more so that we're used to, but it gives us a lot of that nutritional benefit from the fresh milled. So I got all my ingredients into my mixing bowl and stuck it on the stand mixer so that it could mix while I continued making the rest of the food. Here I am turning to rice. I'm making a cilantro lime rice. So I'm first toasting the rice in some butter, then adding some water, some salt. We'll come back with some more flavors later after it's cooked. Originally my thought in filming this was to put all the clips in order, like to do all of the rice in one section and then all of the pitas in one section, but I decided to leave it in the order that it was filmed because this is how cooking in the kitchen is when I've got multiple things on the go. I'm going back and forth between one thing and the next. It's never just focus on one thing and then move on to the next. After my naan dough was mixed, it was time to just let it sit and rest. So I covered it and moved on to the next thing, which is the butter chicken itself. So I'm starting with a lot of aromatics. I'm dicing some onion, some ginger, some garlic. I have those on standby, but the first thing I'm going to start cooking is actually the chicken that's been marinating. I'm doing this in a couple of batches so as not to overcrowd the pan. While that's cooking, I was preparing some of my other ingredients. Ingredients like lime zest and lime and cilantro for the rice. The rice is done cooking, so I added a little bit more butter, some lime juice, lime zest, cilantro, and mixed it all up. That's all for the rice, so I set a lid on it and set it aside while I finished up the rest. When the chicken was done cooking, I removed it from the pot and set it aside, and then added in the onion, ginger, garlic, and let that simmer for a little bit. While it's simmering, I'm getting started on my naan bread. So I start first by weighing out each piece. This isn't necessary, but I do find it really helps to get a more even end product. So I weigh out each piece, divide it up evenly. I think I did 8 in total, and then just started rolling them out. At this point, I'm coming back to the butter chicken. I'm adding some more seasonings, mixing it up. Then I'm throwing in some tomato sauce and a little bit of milk to loosen it up. The chicken goes back into the pot and then it's set to simmer for a little while. I find naan bread and pitas very fun to make because they get so puffy in the oven and it only takes a couple of minutes for them to cook. Now that all of my elements were ready, it was time to plate them up. So I started with the rice and then the butter chicken, and then we used the naan to kind of dip and scoop, and it was so good. We hadn't had butter chicken in a really long time, and I've never actually made it from scratch before. And I don't know if it's authentic or not, but it was yummy. On day 2, we were having a taco skillet of sorts. I had different plans for this week and then realized I didn't have the ingredients I thought I had, so we changed plans last minute. I'm using a recipe from a cookbook, but I'm tweaking it to make it the way that I like it, which is very often what I do when I'm cooking. I rarely follow a recipe as the directions say. I will substitute my own ingredients according to what I have. I'll change things up so that it's the way that my family enjoys eating it. But I'm getting started by browning some onion and beef in a pan and then preparing some of my toppings. So again, we've got some lime zest, some lime juice. I'm shredding some havarti to go on top, and then some cilantro. Once the beef was cooked and drained, I started adding my seasonings. I added seasonings like chili powder, paprika, cumin, garlic powder, onion powder, oregano. After tasting it, I ended up adding a lot more seasonings to this as well, because keeping in mind we're bulking it up and adding rice. So I moved all the ground beef to one side of the pan and toasted the rice before mixing it in along with some tomato paste, and I also added a little bit of brown sugar. I found that this really helped to cut down the acidity from the tomatoes and all the spices and the lime. Then I'm adding 2 cups of homemade beef broth and letting that simmer, letting the rice cook. And while that's cooking, I'm getting started on my side salad. So for that, I needed to first make mayo. I like to add the leftover whey from my yogurt to my mayo to create a fermented mayo. This doesn't change the taste at all, but it does allow it to last longer. Mayo is one of those things that I do not buy from the store. I have not purchased from the store in a very long time because it's so quick and easy to make at home. Once the rice was done cooking, I added some black beans, I added some lime and some different flavors until it tasted the way that I wanted it to taste. I think I also added some chipotle powder to give it a little bit of a smoky taste. Once the flavors were where I wanted it, I added some cheese on top and then covered it with the lid. If you're doing this in a cast iron skillet, you could take it at this point and put it under the broiler in the oven to make the cheese a little bit more toasty and yummy. Now I'm making a Mexican corn salad. So I'm starting with a can of corn, drained and rinsed, some diced red onion, some cilantro, some mayo, some chili powder, some lime juice, and some feta, and I'm mixing that all together. This was a really nice fresh side to have with the skillet. There's a couple of different ways you can eat the skillet. You can eat it as is because there's already rice in there. You could use it as like a burrito filling, but what we like to do is dip chips in it, so we treat it almost like a dip. To serve, we really enjoy some sour cream, some avocado, some lime juice, some cilantro on top, and then we just dip and enjoy. Today's meal was a slow cooker meal. It was one that I had not tried before, so it was new to me. It's got beef and potatoes. It's almost like a casserole in a slow cooker. Starting off by chopping some red pepper and onion, and then I'm cooking that together with the beef in a pan. While that's cooking, I am moving on to my potatoes. So I'm peeling them, I'm chopping them into bite-sized pieces so that they cook quickly in the slow cooker. Once the beef was cooked and the vegetables were soft, I added some garlic, some salt, some pepper. And then the third layer to our casserole is kind of like a sauce. So it starts off with some cream of mushroom soup, a little bit of milk, and some seasonings. There were salt, pepper, paprika, I believe. And then it's just a matter of layering everything in the slow cooker. So first potatoes, then the beef mix, then the sauce, then again potatoes, beef mix, sauce. I covered this and cooked it on low for just a few hours until the potatoes were tender, and then I added some Havarti on top and let it continue cooking for another 30 minutes or so. On the side of this dinner, I made one of our current favorite salads. This is again from one of my cookbooks. This is like an autumn harvest salad, so there's caramelized pecans, there's apples, there's feta, there's apple butter and shallots inside of the dressing. It's really delicious. So we're starting off by candying some pecans with some cinnamon and maple syrup and some olive oil. And then preparing the rest of our ingredients. Now again, I never make a recipe exactly according to the directions. So I substituted the pomegranates in this recipe for cranberries because that's what I had. And then I didn't have any shallots for the dressing, but I did have some red onion left over from the previous meal this week. So I diced that up really fine and caramelized that in some butter. And then again, I tweak things in the dressing. So there's olive oil, there's apple cider vinegar. The recipe also calls for apple butter, which I happen to have on hand. I had canned some earlier in fall. I added some salt and pepper, some of this beer infused whole grain mustard, and then the caramelized onions. After mixing it and tasted it, I also added just a touch of maple syrup to bring up the sweetness a little bit. That was everything for the meal today. I can say that we really enjoyed this casserole. I think if I were to make it again, I would add a whole lot more seasonings, or I would tweak it somehow to make it more flavorful. I found that it was just kind of lacking something. I can't quite put my finger on what it was, but we enjoyed it and we ate it, and it was good. All right, the last meal is another slow cooker meal. This morning I was preparing a beef roast to make beef dip sandwiches. For this one, I was really not following a recipe, and I probably should have, because I think I just went a little bit too crazy with the seasonings. It was good, but I think I would tweak it a little bit next time. So for the rub, I did lots of salt and pepper, garlic powder, onion powder, chili powder, paprika, dry mustard powder, oregano, parsley, onion flakes and garlic flakes. I think I also did some celery salt, and then I rubbed that in really, really good. Then I'm going over this with some of that beer-infused whole grain mustard. And once that was rubbed in thoroughly, I put this into my slow cooker. And then I added some homemade beef broth. I also added a couple other flavorings like Worcestershire sauce. And I did some liquid smoke. I think I would leave the liquid smoke out next time. I think it was just a little too much. I also chopped up an onion to put in there, added some brown sugar, and got that cooking in the slow cooker, and it cooked all day on low. Later that day, I got started on the buns for our sandwiches. Now this is a hamburger bun recipe, a sourdough discard burger bun recipe. This is my go-to recipe. I'll leave it linked below. But instead of shaping it into burger buns today, we were shaping it into longer sub-like buns. It's basically just a matter of getting all the ingredients into the mixing bowl and getting it mixing. And then once it comes into a smooth dough, I can just let it sit for an hour or two until it's doubled in size. I love this recipe because it does use some yeast, but it also uses up my sourdough discard. There's still the benefits of the sourdough, but it's a quick recipe. So when I'm in a pinch, this is a really good one. Meanwhile, I am coming back to my meat. It was done cooking, so I sliced it up into thin slices for the sandwiches. And then for French dip sandwiches, you actually use the broth that the meat was cooking in to dip your sandwich in. So I am straining that broth through a strainer and cheesecloth to make sure that there's no little bits in there. I added some of that sauce back into the slow cooker with the meat just to keep it juicy and tender until we were ready to eat. And then the rest of the sauce I reserved for dipping. Coming back to the buns, this is one I've made countless times before. My kids always love getting involved. They like to help me shape them. Sometimes they like to make their own mini versions of what I'm making. But I divided the dough into 8 equal pieces and then just kind of maneuvered them and shaped them around until they resembled a sub bun. I covered that with a tea towel and let that rise for about another hour until they were puffy, and then those went into the oven. When they came out of the oven, I brushed them with some butter and they were ready to go. On the side, I am making the same salad I made the night before. When I meal plan, I like to either make the same thing twice or make sure I'm using those ingredients in a different way. You saw I use lime and cilantro in 2 different meals. If I'm buying an ingredient, I want to make sure that I'm using it in multiple ways throughout the week so that nothing goes to waste. So oftentimes I will make the same side for a couple different meals. To assemble the sandwiches, I spread both sides first with mayo, then added the meat and some cheese. And then I put these sandwiches open-faced into the oven under the broil setting so that they would get a little bit crispy, a little bit toasty, and warm. I served this with a reserved sauce that I had set aside and the side salad, and this was a really warm, comforting meal. That concludes today's video. I hope you enjoyed and found some inspiration from this. Let me know if you like these types of videos. These are probably one of my most favorite videos to film and to share. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.